The wheelchair squeaked against the concrete as I rolled up to my son's front door, my pride crumbling with each desperate push. Michael took one look at me sitting there with my pathetic suitcase and said the words that shattered what was left of my heart. "Mom, you can't stay here." But the next morning, I found Robert's old business card tucked in a drawer, and suddenly everything changed when the bank manager nearly knocked over his chair rushing to help me. "Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button." 8 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was learning to live on Social Security after Robert died. Funny how life has a way of laughing at your assumptions. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday when your world falls apart? I was coming home from the grocery store, arms full of bags, because I was too proud to use the cart like other old ladies. The rain had started, and these Florida sidewalks become slippery as ice when wet. One moment I was walking, thinking about how I'd stretch the week's budget to include Robert's favorite cookies for his memorial dinner. The next moment I was on the ground, my right hip screaming and my groceries scattered across the parking lot like confetti at a funeral nobody wanted to attend. The paramedic, a kid young enough to be my grandson, kept saying, "Ma'am, try to stay calm," while I lay there calculating how much an ambulance ride was going to cost. 3 surgeries and 4 months of rehabilitation later, here I am. Helen Carter, 68 years old, former bookkeeper, current wheelchair enthusiast. The doctors say I might walk again with enough physical therapy, but physical therapy costs money I don't have. Robert's life insurance barely covered his funeral, and Social Security doesn't exactly fund miracles. The house we'd bought 30 years ago when Michael was in high school became my prison. Everything was upstairs. The bedroom, the bathroom, Robert's office where he'd spent countless hours working on projects I never quite understood. I'd been sleeping on the living room couch for months, using a bedpan like an invalid, showering when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson could help me into her accessible bathroom. My son Michael had visited exactly twice since the accident. The first time, 3 days after I got home from the hospital, he spent 20 minutes explaining how busy he was with work and the kids. The second time, last month, he brought Ashley, his wife, who spent the entire visit checking her phone and making comments about how depressing everything looked. I'd finally swallowed my pride yesterday and called him. "Michael, I need help," I'd said, hating how the words sounded. "I can't manage here anymore." "What kind of help, Mom?" His voice had that careful tone people use when they're already planning their escape. "I need somewhere to stay, just temporarily, until I can figure things out." The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Mom, I'll talk to Ashley. Let me call you back." That was 18 hours ago. No return call. So I'd done something I never thought I'd do. I packed my small suitcase, called a cab, and showed up at their door unannounced. If my own son wouldn't help his disabled mother, maybe seeing me face to face would remind him that family meant something. Or so I'd hoped. Now, sitting in their driveway, I understood that hope was just another word for delusion. Their house was a sprawling suburban monument to success. 3-car garage, manicured lawn, the kind of place that screamed, "We've made it." My wheelchair felt like a grocery cart at a Mercedes dealership. I'd rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the sounds of family life filtering through the walls. Children's voices, Ashley calling out about dinner, the television playing some cooking show. Normal life, the kind I used to have. Michael opened the door wearing his weekend uniform, khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. His expression when he saw me sitting there was something I'll never forget. Not surprise, not concern, but irritation. Pure, unmistakable irritation, like I was a salesperson who'd interrupted his Sunday afternoon. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my family," I'd said, trying to keep my voice steady, "and to ask for help." But I already knew from his face that I'd made a mistake. A big one. "You can't just show up here like this," Michael said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Behind him, I could see Ashley hovering in the hallway, her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. The grandchildren, my grandchildren, peeked around the corner with curious eyes before being quickly shooed away. "I called you yesterday," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I left a message explaining the situation. "Yeah, and I said I'd call you back." Michael stepped outside and closed the door behind him, as if my presence might contaminate his perfect home. "This isn't how we handle family business, Mom. Family business." As if helping your disabled mother was some sort of corporate negotiation that required advanced scheduling and board approval. "I can't live in my house anymore, Michael. Everything's upstairs and I can't climb stairs. I need help." "And you'll get help," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected in business school. "But showing up here unannounced isn't the answer. Ashley has dinner planned, the kids have homework, we have a routine that apparently didn't include space for his mother. I'm not asking to disrupt your routine, just a place to sleep until I can figure something out. A week, maybe 2. Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, you know how Ashley feels about unexpected changes to our household dynamic. Unexpected changes. That's what I'd become. An unexpected change to their household dynamic. Not his mother who'd raised him, worked 2 jobs to put him through college, and celebrated every one of his achievements like it was a national holiday. Just an inconvenient disruption to their perfect suburban schedule. I helped you buy this house," I said quietly. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the desperate edge in my voice. "That was different," he said quickly. "That was a loan, and we paid it back. $20,000 we'd given them for the down payment. Robert had liquidated his retirement fund early, paying penalties because Michael needed help getting established. They'd paid back exactly $3,000 before the payment stopped, and the subject became too awkward to mention. "Of course you did," I said, because what else could I say? Standing there, or sitting there in my case, arguing about money wasn't going to change anything. The front door opened, and Ashley appeared, her perfectly highlighted hair and Sunday best making me acutely aware of my own appearance. Sweatpants, an old blouse, and the kind of desperate energy that follows people who've run out of options. "Helen," she said with a smile so fake it could have been purchased at the dollar store. "What a surprise." "Hello, Ashley. Michael tells me you're having some challenges with your living situation." Challenges. As if being disabled and broke was just a minor inconvenience, like a leaky faucet or a noisy neighbor. "I was hoping to stay here for a few days while I sort things out." Ashley's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh, honey, I wish we could help, but you know how it is with the children's schedules. Soccer practice, piano lessons, family obligations. We barely have time to breathe as it is. Family obligations." I wondered if she realized the irony. "Besides," she continued, "our guest room is being renovated. Has been for months. You know how contractors are." I looked up at their house, all those windows, all those rooms, and knew she was lying. But calling her on it would only make things worse. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, maybe we could help you find a place. There are some nice assisted living facilities." "Assisted living costs $3,000 a month," I said flatly. "I get $800 from Social Security." "There are programs," Ashley chimed in helpfully. "Government assistance. I'm sure someone in your situation qualifies for something. Someone in my situation. A burden. A problem to be solved by someone else's programs and someone else's money." "What about home health care?" Michael suggested, clearly grasping for solutions that didn't involve actually helping. "Someone who could come in during the day. That costs money too. Money I don't have." The silence that followed was deafening. 3 people standing in a driveway worth more than most people make in a year, and nobody could figure out how to help a disabled woman who'd raised one of them and helped financially support the others. "Look," Michael finally said, "let me talk to Ashley tonight. Maybe we can work something out." But his eyes were already telling me the answer, and Ashley's smile had turned into something that belonged in a museum of things that were never genuine to begin with. "Don't worry about it," I said, reaching for my wheelchair's controls. "I'll figure something out." "Mom, don't be like that." "Like what? Realistic?" I started backing down the driveway, my heart breaking with every rotation of the wheels. "I understand, Michael. Family is complicated." As I waited for my cab to return, $40 I couldn't afford for the round trip, I heard their front door close with a soft finality. Through the window, I could see them in their kitchen, Ashley gesturing animatedly while Michael nodded, probably discussing how to handle their Helen problem without anyone getting upset. The cab driver, a kind man from Haiti, helped me with my suitcase and didn't ask questions when I gave him my address. During the ride home, I stared out at the suburban neighborhoods, full of families having Sunday dinner, and wondered when I'd become the kind of person that other people couldn't wait to get rid of. That night, lying on my couch and staring at the ceiling, I realized something that probably should have been obvious all along. I was completely alone. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from hitting rock bottom with a spectacular crash. My hip ached, my pride was in shambles, and my checking account balance was a whopping $237. But for the first time in months, my head was clear. I wheeled myself into Robert's old office, a place I'd barely entered since his funeral 3 years ago. His desk still held his reading glasses, a coffee mug with a permanent ring stain, and stacks of papers I'd never had the heart to sort through. Robert had been meticulous about some things and completely chaotic about others. His filing system, if you could call it that, consisted of shoving important documents into whatever drawer was closest. I started with the top drawer, telling myself I was finally going to organize his affairs properly. Tax returns from 2019, warranty information for a toaster we'd thrown away 2 years ago, restaurant receipts he'd saved for reasons known only to him. Classic Robert, brilliant in some ways, hopeless in others. The middle drawer was more of the same. Old checkbooks, expired coupons, a collection of pens that probably hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. But at the very back, wedged behind a folder of medical bills, my fingers found something that made me pause. A business card, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing that screamed money and importance. Pinnacle Private Banking, Discretionary Wealth Management. Below that, a name I didn't recognize. Jonathan Maxwell, Senior Private Banker. I turned the card over. In Robert's cramped handwriting, account jar PMB 7749 RHC. Emergency access only. Emergency access only. I stared at those words for a long moment. If being disabled, broke, and homeless didn't qualify as an emergency, I wasn't sure what would. Robert and I had banked at Community First Federal for 35 years. Our checking account, our mortgage, our small savings account, everything went through Helen Winters, a pleasant woman who'd helped us with our car loans and knew our names when we walked in. Pinnacle Private Banking sounded like something for people who had private jets and vacation homes in the Hamptons. I'd never heard Robert mention it, not once in 43 years of marriage. I turned the card over again, studying the elegant typography and the embossed logo. What kind of account required emergency access only? And why had my practical, cautious husband hidden it in a drawer like some kind of secret? The smart thing would have been to call first, make an appointment, explain the situation over the phone like a reasonable person. But after yesterday's humiliation, reasonable wasn't really in my vocabulary anymore. I called a cab. Pinnacle Private Banking occupied the top 3 floors of the newest downtown tower, the kind of building with marble lobbies and security guards who looked like they'd been recruited from the Secret Service. The directory in the lobby listed wealth management firms, investment companies, and law offices with names like Pemberton and Associates, places where people's problems were solved with signatures on expensive paper. The elevator to the 32nd floor was the quietest I'd ever ridden. No muzak, no advertising screens, just polished brass and the faint scent of money. When the doors opened, I found myself in a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel than a bank. Leather furniture, original artwork, and a receptionist who managed to look both welcoming and intimidating. "Good morning," she said, with the kind of smile that suggested she was paid very well to be pleasant. "How may I help you?" I held up the business card, hoping I looked more confident than I felt. "I'd like to speak with Jonathan Maxwell." "Please." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have account information." I showed her the card with Robert's handwriting. Her demeanor shifted slightly. Not unfriendly, but suddenly more attentive. "One moment, please." She made a quiet phone call, spoke in tones too low for me to hear, then hung up and smiled again. "Mr. Maxwell will see you right away. Janet will escort you." Janet appeared as if by magic. A woman in her 40s wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She led me down a hallway lined with offices where serious people in expensive clothes had serious conversations about what I assumed were very large amounts of money. "Mrs. Carter," she said as we walked, "Mr. Maxwell has been expecting you." "Expecting me?" I hadn't even known this place existed until an hour ago. We stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Behind a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier sat a man in his 60s with silver hair, and the kind of calm competence that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Ma'am, please have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" The urgency in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polite but distant reception I'd expected. Jonathan Maxwell looked like a man who'd been waiting for this moment and wasn't quite sure it was really happening. "I'm fine, thank you." I positioned my wheelchair across from his desk and pulled out Robert's business card. "I found this among my husband's things. He passed away 3 years ago." Jonathan Maxwell took the card and studied it for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Carter, before we continue, I need to verify your identity. It's standard procedure for accounts of this nature." Accounts of this nature. What exactly had Robert gotten himself into? I handed over my driver's license and social security card. Maxwell studied them carefully, made copies, then sat back in his chair and regarded me with something that might have been amazement. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "you need to see this." Jonathan Maxwell turned his computer screen toward me, and the numbers I saw there made absolutely no sense. At first, I thought there was some kind of mistake, maybe an extra zero, maybe the decimal point was in the wrong place. But as my eyes focused on the account summary, the impossible became undeniable. Robert Henry Carter. Current balance, $47,362, $891.42. "That can't be right," I whispered. Maxwell's expression was gentle but serious. "Mrs. Carter, your husband maintained this account for 22 years. The balance is accurate. $47 million. My Robert, the man who clipped coupons and drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic until the wheels fell off, had $47 million in a secret bank account." My head started spinning, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out right there in that elegant office. "I don't understand," I managed. "Robert was a bookkeeper. He worked for Henderson Manufacturing for 30 years. We lived paycheck to paycheck. According to our records, Mr. Carter was much more than a bookkeeper." Maxwell pulled out a thick folder. "He was Henderson Manufacturing's primary financial consultant for 2 decades, but more importantly, he was an extraordinarily gifted investor." The folder contained documents I'd never seen before: investment statements, corporate partnership agreements, transaction records going back over 20 years. Page after page of financial activity that painted a picture of a man I'd lived with but apparently never really known. "This started small," Maxwell explained, pointing to the earliest statements. "Your husband brought us his first investment in 2001, $50,000 he'd saved from consulting work. He had an unusual approach to the market, very conservative in some ways, incredibly bold in others." I stared at a document dated 2003 showing Robert's account balance at $200,000. He never told me about any consulting work. "According to his instructions, Mrs. Carter, you weren't supposed to know about this account unless something happened to him or you faced a genuine emergency." Maxwell's voice was careful, respectful. He was very specific about that. "What kind of emergency? Financial hardship, medical crisis, family abandonment." He paused meaningfully on that last phrase. Mr. Carter was quite detailed in his instructions regarding circumstances that would trigger your access to these funds. Family abandonment. Robert had somehow anticipated that Michael might turn his back on me, had planned for the possibility that I'd end up alone and desperate. The man who'd seemed so simple, so uncomplicated, had been thinking 20 years ahead while I was just trying to get through each month. "He made specific arrangements," Maxwell continued, pulling out another document. "A monthly allowance if you needed it, $5,000 transferred to any account you specify. But Mrs. Carter, there's more." "More?" I wasn't sure my heart could handle more. "Your husband didn't just invest his own money. Over the years, he identified and funded several promising business ventures. He owned significant stakes in 3 technology companies, 2 restaurants, a small manufacturing firm, and a chain of medical clinics." The room felt like it was tilting. Robert owned restaurants? Among other things, He had an eye for undervalued opportunities and a gift for spotting entrepreneurs who just needed capital to succeed. His portfolio has been generating approximately $2 million annually in passive income. $2 million a year. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping at thrift stores, worrying about every utility bill and stretching groceries to last the week, Robert had been earning $2 million a year in passive income. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out as barely a whisper. Maxwell leaned back in his chair. According to his notes, Mrs. Carter, your husband believed that money changes people. He didn't want it to change your marriage or your relationship with your son. He wanted to live a normal life with the woman he loved, while secretly ensuring that you'd never have to worry about your future. I thought about all the times I'd worried about money, all the nights I'd laid awake calculating bills, all the small luxuries I'd denied myself, all the stress and anxiety over finances that had shadowed our marriage. Robert had let me carry that burden while sitting on $47 million. He was protecting you, Maxwell said gently, as if he could read my thoughts. From the pressure, from the changes money brings to relationships, from people who might want things from you. People like Michael and Ashley. People who treated family like a business transaction when they thought you were poor, but who would suddenly become devoted relatives if they knew you were wealthy. There's something else you need to know, Maxwell said, pulling out one final document. Your husband left specific instructions about your son. My heart stopped. What kind of instructions? Michael Carter is to receive no information about this account unless you specifically authorize it. Your husband was quite clear about that. He wrote, and I quote, "My son has shown himself to be influenced by money and status. Helen's inheritance is to be protected from his knowledge and his influence until she decides otherwise." Robert had known. Somehow he'd seen what I'd been blind to, that Michael viewed me as an obligation rather than family, that he'd measured my worth by what I could provide rather than who I was, and he'd made sure to protect me from that knowledge until the moment I truly needed protection. What do I do now? I asked. Maxwell smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him. Mrs. Carter, you do whatever you want. You have the resources to live any life you choose. The question is, what kind of life do you want to live? I stared out those floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, thinking about Michael's perfect house and Ashley's fake smile and my empty checking account and my impossible situation. 24 hours ago, I'd been a burden begging for charity from my own family. Now I was one of the wealthiest women in the state, and nobody else knew it yet. The ride home from Pinnacle Private Banking felt like traveling between two different universes. I kept the folder of documents clutched in my lap, afraid that if I let go, everything would disappear, and I'd wake up back in my wheelchair with $200 to my name and nowhere to go. But the papers were real. The account was real. $47 million was real. And Robert's deception was real too. By the time my cab pulled into my driveway, I'd moved past shock and landed squarely in anger. Not at the money. How could I be angry about financial security? But at the lie our entire marriage had been built on. Every conversation about money, every budget discussion, every time I'd worried about making ends meet, Robert had been sitting on a fortune that could have eliminated every stress from our lives. I'd loved a man I'd never really known. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden next door when I rolled up my ramp. She waved cheerfully, probably wondering why I was in such a good mood after yesterday's family disaster. If only she knew. Inside, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and really read them for the first time. The scope of Robert's secret life was staggering. Not just investments, but partnerships in businesses I'd never heard him mention. A medical clinic in Tampa that bore our last name, Carter Family Medical Center. A restaurant chain called Helen's Kitchen that specialized in comfort food. Helen's Kitchen. He'd named a restaurant chain after me and never told me it existed. I found my laptop, the old one Robert had bought for staying connected with the grandchildren, and started researching. The Carter Family Medical Center was thriving, providing affordable health care to low-income families. Helen's Kitchen had 18 locations across Florida and Georgia, known for generous portions and prices that working families could afford. While I'd been struggling to pay for my own medical care, there was a